The hip-hop writer is a creator, composing understanding words of culture brilliance, powering a rebalance of the elements equally. Pages of rejuvenated reaffirmation. Simply the almighty leadership of insightful craftwork that stands to build through any confrontation born to be. Yet, his daily duty is as a journalist that questions properly, uses his ears for the good to filter the real. And as the art decays by dilution, he concentrates the best again and again, exposing it in the print. Today's journalist and tomorrow's historian, he listens to share. Here is that necessary attempt executed again and again and again. This is the Power Right Show on S.STREET Media. This is your brother, the lone low life with the home-sewn garment, the Boricua with the build, the true and living, stepping and score, Sunni Allah, a.k.a. S.STREET Low. And we're on S.STREET Media here, the evolution of media. Every intrigue will have its own show. Every incredible thought will have its own episode, and every timeless insight will be archived. And this here is the show of my element of hip-hop, the writer of art on art and science on music, right? So we talked about what I always talk about and emphasize what makes a writer or a journalist would-be historian with time involved, is really an element if they are creative, right? But at the core of it, he's got to know or have some ideas or have some exuberance toward the music. And that's where the science of music comes in. And the science of music doesn't just entail the hip-hop songs that you hear, but it also entails the entire roots. And because hip-hop, to me, is a sampling music, a music that takes the core of everything that's already been and amplifies it, extends it, reuses it, and repurposes things, then that hip-hop journalist slash historian, man, he's got to know his music. He's got to know, you know, the depth of the music. So on this is where the science of music comes in, saying something different about the music, trying to give insights to the music. And on this particular show, I wanted to extend one of my features, obviously, the Classic Crates feature, right? So in this episode will be an extended version of the Classic Crates, and we're going to go all through who we feature in Quincy Jones, okay? We're going to feature the entire catalog of Quincy Jones. And I guess it starts with more people listening to or hearing about Quincy Jones from his interviews, but really I thought about doing this show because I had a lot of ideas to express because of the recent documentary on Netflix, you know, just named Quincy. And that also comes with a soundtrack. Let me give you guys the name of that soundtrack, right? Yeah, so the documentary is called Quincy, A Life Beyond Measure. And the original soundtrack for it is also available, you know, with a lot of songs. It actually has some songs that I'm not really sure where they came from, two or three of them that I didn't know about. Yeah, about 3 of them that I didn't know about, I'm seeing here. But here's what I'm going to say about the general idea to put some of the, I want to go in a stream of conscious fashion that goes through Quincy Jones's life as presented with commentary through the documentary. But then what I'm also going to do is I want to go through a musical perspective, retrospective, looking back on his music. So it's going to have a stream of consciousness vibe because I'm using a format of his documentary and then going through his catalog. So it's very difficult to keep things linear. Why? Because the major facets that make his career also overlap, obviously like anyone else though with their real life, but also overlap with the many constant different things he's done in his career. So when we try to categorize his career chronologically, it's absolutely going to overlap. So I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can to get the ideas that I have to get out about it and make this this Classic Crate really what they're supposed to be and what all journalism of music is supposed to be, a real appreciation or depreciation of the music that is impacting us or unfortunately forced to impact us. So with Quincy, obviously we're dealing with the former, something that has wonderfully impacted us, but there's also a lot of give and take with the ideas that he's presented, the way that he's presented ideas. And I want to go through that by going through particular notes about the Quincy documentary on Netflix. First off, I say this, right? The intro is, the way I see it, once the intro began, where they show all of his plaques, album covers, some of my favorite ones were shown. Obviously, anyone's favorite ones were going to get shown with the amount they showed. And to preface this and to make it more to the listener where I'm coming from in my perspective, I think Quincy Jones is someone with legendary music, more so a legendary gift that has the ability to translate music and prepare it for any type of listener, which is a rare gift. And for our people, it's probably the most abused gift, and probably the gift that we desire the most, us with our rugged individualist desires for riches. But particularly, this is also the story of Quincy Jones, you know, really a pioneer in many ways, musically and in the industry. So I have to preface this to say that this is a success story. It is literally an integrationist story. It's one of assimilation. And we can, and you and I will probably disagree with ideas as we go along here, right? But what is in actual fact is that this perspective really led to an integrating of our supremacy into the world. If you really look at it, though, into this current modern day world, right? So let me explain. If I see Quincy Jones as a pillar, I also see him as the ultimate supplemental pillar. As far as music, the ability not just to make music, but also bolster others into commercial stardom without ruining necessarily their product. See, a lot of people don't get that. Nearly 99% of the artists that are massively commercialized, and we're talking about the ballpark and range of Quincy Jones-like level, they are destroyed from what they once were. In other words, what they usually would make, they are no longer making in a greater way or with that same thematic presence. The themes are gone. Certainly, obviously, the intensity, but also that core of innovation and originality is either suppressed or totally mutated. And the thing is that Quincy Jones ends up being an anomaly in that the majority of artists that he worked with, he's pumped up what they were already doing or what they never had done before, but were really on a natural road to do. So it means that, like Miles Davis, he also knew how to evaluate the artists that he was dealing with. So he was able to not just pick young artists to bring them out that normally wouldn't have lived in those musical lanes that he brought them to, but they were actually perfectly designed for them. You know what I mean? Like it was perfect for them, right? And so the thing about it, right, is that when I say he's a supplemental pillar, is that his ability to compose, arrange, and conduct sound in a commercially appealing way, without lacking the progressive nature of things, I find remarkable, because there are a lot of elements of the music, if we go through these time periods, that his music is lacking, you know, and naturally you would guess that it would lack it, you know, like his soul music lacks it lacks the grit of the Memphis sound per se. It doesn't have, he doesn't really work with singers that have like a grit like Otis Redding generally. You know what I mean? If he does, it's usually in the pantheon of a blues where people are more, over all these nearly 100 years past, or, you know, 50, 60, 70 years past, when they were hearing Quincy Jones works from the blues beginnings, they were more in tune to expecting that kind of style from that. And at the same time, though, when I say ultimate supplemental pillar, is that this ability to compose, arrange, and produce is very rare to see in an artist. You know what I mean? And as we go along, I'm going to try to give pointers about how I see these differences, as far as differences between production, arrangement, and composing. You know, for a beginner, as far as a framework, what I consider production in a non-hip-hop sense is the idea of gathering and recruiting the right instrumentation, the right players, gathering, you know, knowing which tempos, which notes, And we see that later in the film. Hopefully, I remember it though. But it happened with Michael Jackson as well. He noted that with Michael Jackson, right? And the arrangements would literally be in the exact way that he has instruments being played, when they come about, how they are highlighted. And again, that obviously merges with production. And then the compositions, right, are the actual creative, the complete creation of works, which he's not as much known for, right? But to be able to consistently augment that for everyone else is quite extraordinary, right? So in this documentary, right, it's going to go more through the life. My thoughts are going to go through more of the life and the perspectives that he gained, and how he was making the music mentally, as far as what he was trying to express as a consistent theme for himself. Because I'm going to go through the musical perspective later as I go through that catalog in my best way to do it chronologically in order, right? Which is nearly impossible, right? But you know, one of the things that stayed with me that I think about, was his saying when he had his birthday in the beginning, where he said he'd love to share health, that hopefully there's love to share, health to spare, and friends who care. And I think that in the kind of career he's had, it's building these connections profoundly that I find absolutely abnormal, absolutely something that makes him an anomaly, to make genuine relationships. You know, an artist that and especially a music producer behind the scenes that would have that long of a career without that many people, without that much of a legacy and a pantheon of hatred that would be behind them for how he may have ruined their careers, not necessarily fulfilled the careers. We just have to look at hip hop and look at guys that have put other people on, right? We could mention people like RZA, where he didn't really do everyone's career he helped put on as much as he did for others. Certainly never as much as he did for himself. That's a fact. And it's not to be argued here, because obviously he's the one that has to keep going. It's his career. No one else was actually helping RZA. So in this case, we have to look at it from that perspective. But when we as listeners, when we see somebody succeed, we don't really look at the fact that they had to hold their career up. So, and you don't hear stories about blood sucking. You don't hear, if we go through Rockefeller, we hear not only people being brought up that weren't really ready, but we hear also the idea of Jay-Z swallowing artists, right? AKA Jay Electronica, but also using the styles of the artists that he was signing and then swallowing, right? And you don't really hear about this with Quincy Jones. In his music, you don't hear, because he traveled so fast between different styles, you don't hear him switching to different styles and being a robotic copy or a shell of himself, which I find extraordinary as well. But I also say this though, right? Because there's some ideas when I say an integrationist story. I say an integrationist story, and this isn't, and I'm going to talk about this. This idea of, we know the Tupac story, which is not in this film, really. It is not really in this film, the Tupac clash, where Tupac criticized him for having many white wives and then having children like that. And I guess he meant, Tupac was never clearly interviewed for the most part. So a lot of his ramblings, though, made great copy, because he didn't really care, because he expected to be sound bitten. But I think that when I mean integrationist story, what I mean is this, right? It is not just his personal life of the many white wives that he chose and to chose to father his children with. It actually is the framework by which he dealt with the music. You see, so, and we see it as we go along, we'll see how that goes and what I mean by an integrationist story. I think, though, one of the cores to this, and it was very well done in the documentary, and sincerely done. It really, one of the things I loved about the documentary, and obviously his daughter Rashida Jones having such a play in it, was that they were able to capture Quincy's sincerity at nearly every turn. And he hobnobbed with so many big-time bigwigs, it never really felt phony. If anything, though, the people he was saying hi to were always going to get the brunt of that feeling of fakeness and all of those kind of things. But the way that they showed his mother going into the insane asylum, not really being there, the crushing pain of not having his mother there to really be a guiding force of love, really affected him. But it also let him go deeper into whatever his father was teaching him. And there were some really insightful jewels. I just repeat them just for the sake of them, you know? And what I think is this, as a side note, I think that at the time that Quincy was growing up, there weren't many blacks in the south side of Chicago where he was, really violent. The crime was elevated, and even in ways that we don't know about, in the worst times that we know of. And without having any black men as a visual role model, this idea of knowledge of self is always going to be skewed. You know, the knowledge of self, in my estimation, in the music, in the musicians that I've seen, I don't consider it. I consider it most often not found completely, but it equates heavily as a positive aspect of the ability to express every idea that comes from self and composes one's living history is always found in many great men. And in Quincy Jones, the ability to constantly express himself uniquely and in a broadened sense was a form of reaching into the knowledge of self. You know what I mean? And for that was his music. I find an oddity that expresses that in our criticisms of art and artists. Artist was the beginning. It begins with an interview with him on Dr. Dre's podcast. And for the person that thinks simplistically, you'll think the one that beat black women and the one that stayed away from them, right? All right, I'm here all week though, right? But what I mean is something different, right? I mean a legacy that really was as honorable as he saw fit, but I don't see a lack of sincerity in the view that he had, even as I disagree with the intense emphasis and focus, with the integrationist philosophy of being part of what they're doing musically, socially, in the industry, as opposed to us just doing what we do. And it shows in the music, because we can't people look at Quincy Jones because he's so pop and such an anomaly. We look at him as musically and not as some kind of separate entity, when he should be looked at. And that's why it surprises people, his work with Ray Charles and all the others at the time growing up, Dinah Washington, all those others. We have to look at him in contrast to all the other innovators of jazz, particularly Miles Davis, the innovators as Ray Charles, who even, no matter how pop Ray Charles got, Ray Charles' music always had a little bit more grit than even Quincy Jones had. So it's pretty interesting, right? But in one of my last shows, the last two shows I did on called the Appropriation Lecture, I said something about the way our people deal with situations and have dealt with them. And we said that they were appropriation in exchange for assimilation. And I explained it as, we'll take this, nigga. You be like that, nigga. Right? And this understanding relates to Quincy in that I saw many of the things that he did as an appropriation in exchange for assimilation. But the thing is that his appropriation wasn't sacrificing the quality of his work. And that's where the oddity comes in. I see that he thought assimilation was a good thing. He even has quotes that we'll get into that say it. And it's just amazing how you can never listen to Quincy Jones' music and say, you know what, he could have done this better as far as a more gritty aspect or nothing like that. And you just don't get that. It's all in line with his works, and everything from the beginnings all the way through Michael Jackson and past that, to his producer of the year and album of the year with Back on the Block in '89. All of these works make sense. They all make sense, and that's why the sincerity in his musical career is astounding to me, right? Let's see where we could begin, right? Some more ideas, right? One of the great quotes of the documentary was when he said that ego is overdressed insecurity. Not much to say about that. You know, a guy that has dealt with so many legends, and it becomes highlighted when he probably has worked with legends as Frank Sinatra and others, um, rising stars like George Benson, who was really a rising star, and he took him to his peak, and others, and they didn't have the ego that other lesser artists have. And of course, the whole "We Are the World" thing. You know, "We Are the World" growing up, I thought was the worst song in the universe, though. And that opinion will not change, right? But it's still a seminal song that I probably will skip. That's how important this career is. I don't have to talk about "We Are the World." Isn't this great? I don't have to talk about that shit. But let's see. Also, another jewel in the documentary that bears doing an homage to is when he talks about the work that's being done and his father's work ethic. And he says that his father always told him, once a task has just begun, never leave it till it's done. Either labor great or small, do it well or not at all. You know, I just thought that was a real jewel. Like, these are the, affirmations to memorize, you know. But another important thing I thought was well done was the center of the documentary around the Smithsonian Museum opening. And I appreciated that because the legacy of our musical process, its cohesion and fluidity from one to the other is a thematic understanding Quincy built on in his music incredibly, right? In this documentary, it's an overstatement, right? The need to show and see the connection of our genres, not merely as an evolution of sound, but as a furtherance of elevation of idea expression, right? So Quincy Jones constantly talks about the worth of the song, the measures of a song, and he constantly talks about the thematic cohesion of the genres. And, I think that many of the interviewers I've researched, and not really this documentary I have fault with, because this documentary had lots of work to do to get to these deeper points. But Quincy Jones has always seen a connection with all the black diaspora and all the black music. And that's one of his biggest powers. You know, in a lesser realm, we could look at, say, the elevation of salsa when Willie Colon starts to use different genres of the Latin Caribbean and even South America to extend some of his works, like, using bomba, plena, Cheche Cole with the African rhythms, the direct African rhythms and melodies. So if we look at Quincy Jones' career, there's a pop premise to it, and I'm going to show you where it begins, I also want to say this, because I'm still in the documentary and I'm not in the musical aspect yet. Still not there yet. But it made sense, and I expected them to center a lot of the key aspects of enlightenment for him, his version of enlightenment, being to work with Frank Sinatra, And I would have liked to hear more about, of course you weren't though, about how Frank Sinatra actually was able to integrate Quincy Jones and Count Basie and his orchestra to go with him through all of Las Vegas, but that's a mafia tale for another time. That's why we didn't hear about it in the documentary. But Quincy Jones's career is about the integration of white and black, and how we can bring our rhythms and music to speak a language universally in music. And, I've made the argument at times that music is not necessarily universal. People have to listen to it. It is just like any other language. You have to spend a long time learning it. You know what I'm saying? And I don't mean reading notes. I mean understanding the messages and the techniques and the real depth of the music and what it means profoundly to our peoples and how it extends to other peoples that have not originally made it, right? And let's see what we got here, right? In the documentary, right? People, there is a validation that he actually gets and feels by dealing with Frank Sinatra. And I think if you listen closely, it was much more mutual than what we thought. And The integrationist ideas continue as the work goes on because he becomes more social and political as it goes along. So in the scoring phase, right, of the documentary, when he talks about scoring the films and it's linked with his family growth, here we hear his integrationist sentiment expressed very clearly, right? Right after his next white wife and mother of his children is shown, of his next children is shown, he says this, right? And he's clearly referencing, to me, my favorite scores from Quincy Jones out of that vast 20 to 30 film scores was, he says, it's just beginning to become so that it isn't such a sensationalism to see interracial love relationship or even the role of where the black man really plays the role of a man rather than just a character, right? Now, I don't find this in this context for his life. I don't find it, I don't agree with it 100%, but here's why. But I don't find it a fiendish sentiment that most other people and most other artists, I would have to cling to that, right? It's a sentiment that merges two things, right? It merges the unnecessary with the necessary prerequisite, right? What should have came before. It's important that during his time, though, some of the first movies, obviously In the Heat of the Night, clearly the major example, right? That's where we see a black man for the first time in a movie, leading role, slapping the white man, right? And then They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. He did that one too. And he also did another one, which I'm going to talk about later, which actually is my favorite one as far as the scores go. But this idea of linking the interracial love is something he's throwing in as a personal reality, and it's clear and it shows a lot. This is where most people will find fault. I don't, because I understand his perspective, even